Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our podcast on the leadership series. Today, we will be speaking about engineering the next C suite, leadership that scales the enterprise. Leadership is a challenge, and it's not just about managing teams, it's about building leadership systems that can sustain strategy, culture, market confidence at a larger scale. So I'm joined today by Nick Ashley, who's the co-founder of Red Rock International with experience in developing capabilities across MENA and the UK to explore what it's really like to develop C-suite leaders who can navigate complexity, uncertainty, and enterprise-wide consequences. Nick, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks very much, Rifki. Well, very nice to be with you. And very nice to be with you, Rifki. We've known each other for quite a long time, haven't we? Which is great. And this is a lovely topic to talk about. Super challenging, being on a C-suite team. And we have many years of experience of working with C-suite teams. And some of them have been super inspiring in terms of how to do things and how to lead businesses in our current age.
Thank you so much, Nick. So I'm going to dive deep into your area of expertise and which you've been doing for quite some time. So it's about executive readiness, enterprise accountability, and legacy of decision making. That goes straight into our start, which is the first segment. What truly differentiates C-suite leadership from other leaderships?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, Rifki. C-suite leadership is obviously moving higher up the chain in terms of length of vision for how long those decisions need to be made. If we're operational, we're working very much with immediate circumstances, and as we move up the strategic levels, then our work has a longer timeline. So the C-suite team in that sense is like any other team. It's a normal team, but it's focusing on the longer strategic levels. So I think three things that really we've seen that differentiate C-suite leaders compared to other leaders, or three things that really give you success. So the first is super strong ability to be a team player. So a C-suite team is a hard place to be because unlike when you start off, you can make lots of mistakes. When you get to the C-suite team, there's expectations for you to perform very well and really not to make any mistakes, which is unhelpful. But a team player, you're part of a team. So obviously it's a leadership position, but you're part of a team. So the ability to commit and be part of that team. Second, superpower for C-suite people is humility. So you've got to build relationship with the people around you. That's done through vulnerability. And you want to be authentic. The higher up you go, the more on show you are for your authenticity. Humility, the willingness to say what you do and don't know and what you're good at and what you're not good at, builds authenticity. And the third thing that separates, I think, C-suite people is an optimistic disposition, an optimistic outlook. And C-suite people need to be people that build hope, and they have not a unnatural, unrealistic optimism, but they're forward thinking and thinking, how do we do this? How do we grow the organization? How do we create vision and create hope in those that they're leading? So three things that I think that differentiate people on the C-suite team is really good team players, humble attitude, and a optimistic disposition.
Thank you very much, Nick. I think that's quite insightful. That's a wider way of looking at it. So segment 2 takes us into the C-suite level. How does leadership shift from leading people to leading systems, risks, and long-term value?
Yes, I think those are great questions as well, Rifki. And there's a whole variety of tasks that the C-suite needs to do. I think that one that's particularly useful to focus on is strategic execution or strategy execution. So the C-suite specifically is responsible for the strategy of the company. 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, but that long-term strategy. And in order to do that well, there are three parameters which are really helpful. So first is, and probably the easiest, is the clarity. What are we going to do and what's it going to look like? What are our strategic goals? So getting clarity on that is the C-suite team's job. The second is in order to execute that strategy, what behaviors do we need as a team? So it's a we thing, it's a team thing. It's not an individual operating that strategy. But secondly, clarity on how do we need to position ourselves? What behaviors do we need as a team in order to get that strategy through? The third thing is, the interesting thing is, what are the systems that we need that will execute the strategy? Because there's often a focus on existing systems, management systems, and how to refine those and improve those. And the strategy can often get forgotten. Or, once you've got strategic goals, that's cool, but then actually having the systems to implement them, to create accountability and to monitor them is really important for that team.
Thank you so much. You triggered a thought over there, Nick. So when we have first-time executives, sitting in the C-suite position, what do they underestimate?
I think first-time C-suite leaders, they have come from a background of significant competence in a specific field. So finance or operations or HR. So these guys are very competent in that field. And there's an underestimation then of the need to form of being able to commit to a new team. So C-suites can easily become reporting systems. So everybody comes along and says, how's your team doing? Oh, it's doing great, etc., etc. Oh, there's a problem with this type of thing. Whereas actually that new team member is a new team member and they need to commit into the C-suite team as opposed to the team that they've come from. And then that humility piece plays in because they need to be willing to let go of their identity. So you've built an identity on being a very competent decision maker or financial strategist or whatever. Now you're in a new team where if you hold on to that identity, you are keeping yourself in your old team and you're losing the identity of being part of the executive team for the strategy. So that's, I think, very easily underestimated. People have worked very hard in a particular field. They've become very competent, knowledgeable, and they want to bring that knowledge into the C-suite team, which of course is the right thing to do. But actually, they've got to make a move. We're in the C-suite team now. We're not in the finance team or the HR team or the operations team. I think that's really underestimated and difficult to do.
Thank you. Would you be able to relate examples? Anything that you could?
Yeah, I was an engineer. I worked for a large chemical company and I was in a chemical plant. So the chief engineer, the guy who's in charge of the engineering, was an amazing engineer. Did an absolutely brilliant job as chief engineer. He was promoted to be the chief executive. And it was super difficult for him to leave behind the identity of the chief engineer. And he, in not leaving behind that identity, he also did not create space for the guy that followed him to do that role. And he then didn't have the capacity to lead this C-suite team and to focus on the strategy. So that failure to leave behind an area that he was super competent and an expert in really damaged his performance in the C-suite team as his chief executive. So I think that's super challenging. And of course, nobody told him that. Nobody guided him and said, hey, listen, you've got to leave that behind now and really focus on this. So I think that's very difficult. We build our identity around it and then difficult to let go.
Nick, thank you so much for that. What does developing C-suite readiness in 2026 and beyond entail? I mean, look at the current situation we are in. It doesn't matter whether we are in Indonesia or whether we are in Singapore or whether we are in the heart of GCC. So I think this touches on VUCA and BANI both. Could you just let us know what does it entail? What should we look for in developing C-suite?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Rifki. And I think the first point to mention is it's all about moving the dial as opposed to getting the dial over to 100%. So all the time with leadership and teamwork and these things, we're wanting to get better at it, but recognizing we're on a journey. So we're not actually at a arrival point. But as long as we're making progress, it's good news. I think for 2026 or for the current climate we're in, the two aspects of C-suite leadership that are really worth highlighting is one, strategy, which we've talked about. That's really helpful, I think, for C-suites to anchor around. Our job is to execute strategy. And the second is culture. The C-suite is the leader of the company's culture. And culture is defined by company's values. And this is challenging areas for people because we get it, we need values. But then actually, how do we, Rifki, you're in my team, you need to have this value. It's kind of like, yeah, that doesn't really work. But a company's values is, as famously said by Netflix, people that demonstrate the values get promoted, people that don't demonstrate the values get let go. So it's kind of what the company values. So, but defining that culture is really important. And ideally, the culture should support the strategy. So if the strategy is move fast and be innovative, then innovation is a great value. If the strategy is steady state and be cost effective, then innovation is not a great value. So culture that defines the strategy of the company. But 2026, I think it's worth, bringing about the quadruple business plan, the idea that you've got those 4 areas. And the first area is profit. So that's what's easy to focus on because it's numerical and it's obviously the foundation. We've got to make money as a business or else we can't do anything else. Second is people. What's our plan, our strategic plan for people? How are we going to value people and how are we going to build a great place to work where everybody's queuing up to get into our company? And the third one is the planet. What's our plan for the environment? How do we minimize our impact? But what are we actually going to do for the planet? And then the fourth one is purpose or spiritual, gets called various things. But basically, what impact do we want to have on society around us? What do we want to do for the places that we find ourselves in? So if the C-suite's intentional about developing a quadruple business plan, they can then identify the culture and then they can steward that culture. And they steward it firstly through themselves. We're going to demonstrate this culture. So I think for 2026, with all of the kind of rapid change and so on, if we've got that sense of detailed planning and a sense of where we want to go, the culture and the strategy then fit into that and give a clear job description for that C-suite team.
Thank you so much, Nick. So, we touched upon the 2 concepts which originated from the military. One is VUCA, and then the other one is BANI, B-A-N-I. This has strategic implications on the C-suite. This touches on risk, this touches on anxiety, this touches on complexity. How must C-suite leaders change the way they assess risk, make decisions, and communicate, certainly in a BANI world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, Rifki, your experience, my experience living in Middle East, it feels a little bit like that all the time. So there are periods of steady state, but actually we're dealing with that a lot of the time. And I think there's some fairly simple things to do in these circumstances. So the first is to be able to simplify the situation. So like the BANI, the uncomprehensible amount of information we're around. So our job in the C-suite is to simplify this. And a good way to do that is to say, what's the question that we're trying to ask here? Or what's the question that we're trying to address? Because anxiety is a form of fear, and fear then makes us, fight or flight, makes us move quickly and creates all of those things. So slowing it down and say, okay, what question are we trying to address here? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is to have a faster planning cycle. So to think, okay, things are changing quickly. It's normal. We just need to plan more regularly and take on board the data and allow that to change. And then the third thing, which is the one that's easy to miss, is to over communicate. So if you're on the C-suite, you know everything. And there's kind of an assumption that other people know a lot, or certainly know more than they do. So really good structures and routines and rituals to over communicate to people, to let people know what's going on and what the plan is. If we do that, then we're able to steer quite successfully through these times.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you so much. That triggers a thought. So one of the things that I recommended in an earlier organization when I was developing LDP courses for the upper management was the requirement for a DSS, which is a decision support system. The data, the analytics, the required information, and then the nice to know information, and then the other information, which is either the grapevine or which is not so critical, but it's important to a certain extent. So this cycle helped a lot of the managers not procrastinate on what should be, on what they should know or what they should do. They don't overanalyze. They had people like us to advise them on the numbers, on what's happening, the next steps, the demands and the supplies. And we had to translate that so that they know the way we brought up the information, they know the background to it. That would help the leaders make those informed choices. So that's what we did in an earlier stage. And I think that level of information is very, very important. That cycle of engagement, what does the leadership need to make solid decisions? That's something we will implemented.
That's really good, Rifki. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think that kind of, what the problem for C-suites generally is nobody gives you a job description.
Yeah.
So I think it's very helpful to think through for organizations to think, what's the job description? What do we need people to do? The whole thing of competencies is maybe not quite the right phrase, but what behaviors do we need from these people? And then that the communication is obviously a massive part. But I think within that, there's two aspects. There's the skill of communicating. So like you're a great communicator. So you've got skills in that. But you can learn how to become a good communicator. But I think what's often missed is the discipline and the ritual. So this is like, we're going to communicate this every week, which is what you're talking about, isn't it? You're talking about creating a systematic approach to communication. I think that's super helpful. And in a strong BANI type environment, we need to up the ante on that. We really need to think people need to know more. And they're desperate for information. If we don't give the information, they'll guess.
Yeah.
And usually guess worst case. So I think that's a very nice approach.
Thank you so much. And the other thing is, one thing I'm noticing from the past is the strategy. It's a fantastic document. It's got a lot of pages. It's got a lot of complexities. It's got 5 years in it, but there is no plan on how to execute that strategy, which is what I've noticed.
Yeah.
And one of the arguments I've had is have a simple strategy with goals and objectives year on year for different levels of reportees under the C-suite, for different business silos, and have them flow down so that it can be audited and it can flow down to objectives for people reporting below them, N-5, N-6, all the way down, so that the strategy runs and have regular checkups, audits, as to where we are on the strategy, course correct as we go along. I mean, we've all heard of the trim tab from Stephen R. Covey. That trim tab is very important, what the trim tab should do. Who is this trim tab in a department? I mean, we know what a trim tab is on a ship, but then what is the role? Because these are very critical roles. There are people who keep their ear to the ground, who have live information, especially in an FMCG trade. That connection between the very top and the very bottom is very important, and which flows into what do C-suite leaders commonly miss at the times of disruption? Is this connection is what they miss, or is there something else?
Yeah, that's good. Rifki, like we say, I mean, going back to strategy, I think it's really worth emphasizing a primary C-suite's job is to execute strategy. Otherwise, you can have a management team, can't you? You can have a senior management team that manages steady state, does things more effectively, etc., etc. But the C-suite's bringing about change. If you've got strategic goals, they normally involve change. So that's the primary job. And, good companies, people know what strategic goals are outside of the C-suite. That's a really good kind of litmus test of how well are we doing this? Does anybody know what our strategic goals are? So I like what you're saying there. Yeah, I think what people miss, or what we all miss, we're all in this, aren't we? Number one is the resilience of people. So we were once running a leadership exercise, and we were taking a group up a mountain, and we'd kind of pressurized this group. This was the third day of this exercise. They were sleep deprived and all that sort of stuff. And the person that we'd assigned to lead the group could see the kind of fatigue in their faces. and said to me, Nick, we need to get this group off the mountain. There's no way they're going to get up to the top. So I said, well, that's a good call. I said, well, just have a conversation with the group and ask them what they want to do. So she got the group together and she said, look, we've got the option to go down if we want to, or we can go to the top of the mountain. Let's just go around and say what you want to do. Each person said they wanted to go to the top of the mountain. Now, obviously, there's a bit of a caveat to that, isn't there? The first guy says it, so it's much harder for the second guy not to say it. But the point is that when you ask people, you just think, hey, you're much, I'm guessing your emotional state and where you are, and I'm guessing that wrong. Actually, you've got a much stronger will to succeed and to fight than I thought you had. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that times of disruption are the rich times. The really hard time to lead are in times of success. So in times of success, we're a bit fat. Everything's a bit comfortable. We worked with a massive organization that was super successful, and they were down. We were running this session for them, and the main guy said, we need to have a tiger spirit, a warrior spirit, and we all get that, but that was pretty impossible to do in a real time of success, or it's very, very skillful to be able to and to do that. So I think in times of disruption, this is the opportunity for us to build a team. This is where we can get people together, hear what they're thinking and saying, actually draw closer together and get through it together, get through the disruption together. So the kind of mistake that we can make is in the C-suite. One is we miss how resilient people are and how amazing they are. And secondly, we never ask them. We think, we're the C-suite. We're the guys with the responsibility for this. We need to make all the decisions. There's some truth in that, but also we need to create the space to hear what other people are thinking, what their ideas are, and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's generally what happens.
Thank you so much. So we've come to the last part of our segment, and this is about legacy. So we have the C-suite, okay? And then we need to build a pipeline of leaders reporting to that C-suite. Hopefully when the ones at the C-suite have served their term, and then they need another replacement to take over from where they are, a new leadership, like in any organization. So, Nick, in your experience when developing C-suite leaders, what is the single mindset shift organizations must prioritize first?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rifki. I don't really know the answer to that. Let me take it on a different angle. So I think, it's not about knowledge, and it's not that knowledge isn't important. I read this great quote recently, which said, if knowledge was the answer, we'd all be billionaires with six packs. So because we can study things and learn things, can't we? But actually, it's important, but it's not the answer. And experience coupled with mentoring, coaching, feedback, all of those sorts of things. So giving people that have potential for senior leadership roles, C-suite roles, giving them experience, and ideally, some sort of 2-year development plan or something like that, where they can take part in C-suite meetings, they can sit in on a board meeting, they can do presentations, they can get feedback, etc. So I think that's super helpful. And then identifying the people who are the cultural fit as opposed to the skills fit. So the skills can always be added, but if you get somebody on your C-suite team who's the wrong cultural fit, it is a nightmare. And of course, then changing that is really, really difficult. So being able to develop a pathway whereby you can make good decisions about the cultural fit for these people, that they've got humility, that they're team players, these sorts of qualities. The one thing we haven't talked about, Rifki, which I think is probably, up there with those qualities, is creativity. So when we're faced with these disruption situations and BANI situations, etc., we're often staring into a wall, aren't we? And there was an Iranian guy who once had this lovely quote which said, I am surrounded by incredible opportunities, brilliantly disguised as impossible circumstances. And I think that's the landscape that the C-suite team's often in. We are really up against the wall here. And then the creativity and the ability to do collective creativity as opposed to just individual creativity. So, getting everybody's ideas and processing those, super critical ingredient in that C-suite team. And selecting people that are creative, optimistic thinkers in that space, forward thinking, as opposed to, what's tempting for us is this isn't working because of this and because of that person, etc. I mean, those are valid conversations, but we really want to be forward thinking. So selecting people and having a culture that's geared up to seeing opportunities that are different. AI is a good example, isn't it? Because we all fear AI. As soon as the word's mentioned, we think immediately associate that with job loss, don't we? So, and then if we think a little bit further, we think, is it my job? But actually, it's just another one of these opportunities to think, how do we use this creatively, and how do we, those things. Yeah, it's good.
Thank you so much. And I can't help but reminisce on certain experiences from the past, and that made me laugh a little. And I was trying to contain myself as much as I can. Speaking of these, the mindset shift, the decisiveness was when during the blockade of 2017, one of the leaders I was reporting to, I saw him apply SWOT and Pastille methods. He took stock of what the company was good at, what the company has, the partnership the company has, and then he applied it on Pastille, looking at the political, the economical, the environment situation, looked at where it is easiest or the best relationships between two different entities, and started importing the most essential items to the people of Qatar during that blockade. Most of the companies suffered, but because of the decision he made, and that thought process was truly admirable, the company actually made a record profit on that year, if you can believe it. So that's smartness, that's creativity. What you said was applied there, and I could not help but remember him at this moment, and I'm going to send him this link. So just to recap all of this, so Nick, the podcast is being shared across the world, to be honest. And I want people to let us know what challenges that they've had in the comments below, because that's really important. And there's a lot that we can help, because we are in a region where we've had a lot of storms, and that storms has brought the best in you and me and all the other leaders who are watching this podcast. So it's not about having all the answers. It's about doing with what you got and having that hunger to perform, making the best out of whatever that we have. So the conditions may not be great, but then it's about creating conditions where the organization continues to perform, to trust, to adopt. Nick, I would like you to add a few words to our closing remarks as to what our audience can follow, because this podcast is for the senior HR leadership and also for the C-suite. Over to you, Nick.
I think, Rifki, the most, we want to be inspired, don't we? And part of the C-suite's job actually is to create poetry. So, prose is where we read an instruction manual on how to do something, and poetry is where something touches us. And people have, 3 areas where they can kind of grow. One is you can get knowledge. So that is important, but as we said, it's not going to necessarily give you success. The second area is you can become skilled. So I can watch football, and then I know about football, and I can practice football, and I can become skilled or reasonably skilled. And then the third area is motivation, of wanting to do something. So even if I'm skilled at football, doesn't mean to say that I'm going to track back and tackle again. So the poetry for us touches people and creates motivation. And to do that, it's finding and identifying what we're about, the purpose. And if we can and that's usually people-centric. It's normally people-centric. We're about people, really. So if we can define the purpose, I think that's super helpful. And the most useful, most inspiring thing that we've seen recently is the company Patagonia. So they manufacture outdoor clothing, and their big thing is the environment. But if you want to be in the environment, you've got to be about people. And if you want to be about people, you've got to create jobs, got to make money. And they wrote a book recently called The Responsible Company, What We've Learned in the last 50 years. And in that book is a checklist for these are good things to have in a responsible company. And we found those incredibly helpful to think, as a C-suite people, these are the sort of things we should be thinking about. This is a broad spectrum of that full quadruple business plan. And if we do that, we're going to create great companies, great places to work that have significant impact on societies that we live in. And our lives are going to be very fulfilling.
Thank you so much, Nick. So I'd like to thank our audience for following us, because the podcast series is quite in depth, quite advanced, and quite vast. And Nick, thank you very much for taking part in this podcast. It's that something that people should know what it takes. Everyone talks about leadership programs, management development programs, but I haven't come across anyone who goes deep dive into developing C-suite, which is very, very important. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and we welcome you, and we welcome your audience as well to share their thoughts, to like, to subscribe, to share, and to comment. Thank you very much. Take care.
Rifki,
Goodbye.
you're doing a fantastic job. Well done.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, lovely spending time with you, Rifki.
Likewise.
Yeah, God bless you.
You too.